"Take my girl before it falls," she begged, her voice cracking like splintered wood. The Lakota hunter lunged forward, his hands closing around the child's waist, just as the wagon groaned and tipped toward the canyon below. He yanked them both back, boots scraping against crumbling stone. And when the wagon finally plunged into the abyss, all three of them were still breathing on solid ground, Montana territory. September 1879. The air in the high country carried the bite of early autumn. Sharp and clean, smelling of pine resin and distant snow. Sonish Red Fox moved through the forest like a shadow given form, his moccasins soundless against the carpet of needles and moss. He carried a string of rabbits over his shoulder, their bodies still warm, and his rifle rested easy in the crook of his arm. The hunt had been good. The forest had provided. He would smoke the meat tonight and trade half of it in town come morning. He was 2 miles from his cabin when he heard it. A scream, high and desperate, cut through the stillness like a blade. Sonish froze, every muscle coiling tight. He listened. The forest listened with him. Then came the sound of wood splintering, a horse's panicked whinny, and another scream, this one edged with terror that turned his blood cold. He dropped the rabbits and ran. His feet found purchase on stone and root without thought, his body remembering paths his mind had long since forgotten. He leaped a fallen log, ducked beneath low branches, and burst through a thicket of wild rose, just as the scene unfolded before him like a nightmare. A wagon teetered on the edge of a cliff, its back wheels already over empty air. The front axle had caught on a jutting boulder, the only thing keeping it from plunging 300 feet into the rocky canyon below. The horse, a chestnut mare, thrashed in the traces, eyes rolling white with panic. Every movement sent the wagon rocking, inching it closer to the drop. Inside the wagon bed, a woman clutched a small child to her chest. The woman's face was pale as birch bark, her dark hair tangled around her shoulders. The child, a little girl no older than 6, sobbed into her mother's neck. The woman's eyes found Sonish's across the distance, and in them he saw the terrible clarity of someone who knew they were about to die. "Help us," she called out, her voice shaking but steady. "Please, help my daughter." Sonish assessed the situation in the span of 3 heartbeats. The wagon was balanced on a knife's edge. The mare's thrashing would send it over within moments. If he tried to calm the horse first, the wagon might tip before he reached the woman and child. If he went for them first, the mare might bolt and take them all down anyway. There was no good choice. There was only the choice that might let them live. He moved. Fast and low, he circled wide around the mare, speaking in Lakota, his voice a low rumble that cut through her panic. "Easy, sister. Be still, I see you. Be still." The mare's ears flicked toward him, but she did not stop moving. He could see the foam at her mouth, the cuts on her legs where she had scraped against stone. She was beyond reason, lost to fear. Sonish made his decision. He pulled his knife from his belt and in 2 swift cuts, severed the traces that bound the mare to the wagon. She lunged forward, free at last, and disappeared into the trees. The wagon lurched backward. The woman screamed. Sonish dove, his hands closed around the edge of the wagon bed just as it began to slide. The wood bit into his palms, splinters driving deep, but he held on. His boots skidded on loose gravel, searching for purchase. He found it, dug in, and pulled. The wagon stopped. Barely. He could feel the weight of it trying to drag him over the edge. Feel the way the boulder beneath the axle was starting to shift. "Take my girl before it falls," the woman begged. And there was no hesitation in her voice now. Only the fierce clarity of a mother's love. She thrust the child toward him, her arms shaking. "Take her, please. Take Hazel." Sonish did not argue. He released the wagon with one hand, reached in, and grabbed the little girl around the waist. She was small, light as a fawn, and she did not fight him. He pulled her out and set her on solid ground behind him, then turned back for the mother. "Now you," he said, his voice hard. "Give me your hand." Cecilia Shaw looked at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, and for a moment he thought she might refuse. Then the wagon groaned, a sound like a dying animal, and she lunged forward. Her hand found his, and he locked his grip around her wrist. He pulled. She scrambled over the edge of the wagon bed, her skirts tangling around her legs. And then she was falling toward him. He caught her against his chest, his free arm wrapping around her waist, and they both went down hard on the rocky ground. Behind them, the boulder gave way. The wagon tipped, slowly at first, then faster, and then it was gone, tumbling end over end into the canyon below. The sound of it breaking apart echoed up from the depths, a series of crashes that seemed to go on forever. Sanish lay on his back, the woman sprawled across him, both of them breathing hard. The little girl, Hazel, crawled over to them and buried her face in her mother's shoulder. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sounds were their ragged breaths and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. "You are alive," Sanish said finally, his voice rough. Cecilia pushed herself up on trembling arms and looked down at him. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her hair a wild tangle, but her eyes were clear and bright. "You saved us," she whispered. "You saved my daughter." He sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in his back where he had hit the ground. "The wagon is gone," he said, looking toward the cliff's edge. "Everything in it." "I don't care," Cecilia said, and her voice broke. She pulled Hazel into her lap and held her tight, rocking back and forth. "I don't care about any of it. We're alive." "Hazel is alive." Sanish studied them both. The woman's dress was torn at the shoulder, her hands scraped raw. The child's face was pale with shock, her eyes too wide, but she was unhurt. They were lucky. Impossibly lucky. "Where were you going?" he asked. Cecilia looked up at him, confusion flickering across her face. "I don't know," she admitted. "We were trying to reach Fort Benton. My husband died 3 months ago, cholera. We had nothing left in Helena, no family, no prospects. I heard there was work in Fort Benton, laundry or cooking, something I could do with Hazel. We left 2 days ago. The road to Fort Benton is east," Sanish said quietly. "You were traveling west," her face crumbled. "I got lost," she whispered. "The map I had was wrong, or I read it wrong, I don't know. The trail kept getting narrower and rougher, but I thought if I just kept going, it would get better. And then the wheel hit a stone and the axle cracked, and the mare panicked." She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. "I almost killed us both." Sanish rose to his feet and offered her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her up, then reached down and lifted Hazel into his arms. The child did not protest. She simply laid her head on his shoulder, exhausted. "You cannot stay here," he said. "Night comes fast in the mountains, and the cold with it. My cabin is an hour's walk north. You will come with me." Cecilia hesitated, her eyes searching his face. He knew what she was thinking. He was Lakota, she was white. The world had taught her to fear him, to see him as a threat. But he had just pulled her and her daughter from the jaws of death, and she was smart enough to know she had no other choice. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you," he nodded once, shifted Hazel's weight in his arms, and started walking. Cecilia followed, her steps unsteady at first, then growing stronger. The forest closed around them, the shadows deepening as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Sanish moved with purpose, following paths only he could see, and behind him, Cecilia Shaw walked into a future she had not imagined. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a dream. It was small, sturdy, built from rough-hewn logs chinked with clay and moss. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a covered porch stretched across the front, wide enough to sit on during summer evenings. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and gray. and the smell of wood smoke mixed with the sharp scent of pine. Sanish had left a fire banked in the hearth that morning, and it still burned low, waiting for him. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, still carrying Hazel. Cecilia followed, and he heard her sharp intake of breath as she took in the space. The cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. The floor was packed earth covered in woven mats and animal hides. A stone hearth dominated one wall, with a cast iron pot hanging from a hook and a stack of firewood nearby. Along another wall stood a workbench covered in tools, knives, traps, and strips of leather. Shelves held jars of dried herbs, smoked meat, and other supplies. A narrow bed frame with a corn husk mattress occupied one corner, covered in thick furs. Everything was clean, orderly, functional. "This is your home," Cecilia said. And it was not a question. "Yes," Sanish replied. He set Hazel down gently on the bed, and the child immediately curled into a ball, her eyes already closing. He turned to Cecilia. "You will sleep here tonight. The child, too." "I will sleep outside." "No," Cecilia said quickly. "You don't have to do that. This is your home. We can sleep by the fire." "You will sleep in the bed," Sanish repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. He moved to the hearth and began building up the fire, adding logs until flames leaped high. The cabin warmed quickly, the chill driven back. He filled a pot with water from a barrel near the door and set it to heat. Then took down 2 tin cups and a cloth bag of dried mint. Cecilia stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, looking lost. Sanish glanced at her, then gestured toward a wooden chair near the hearth. "Sit," he said. "You are in shock. You need warmth and food." She obeyed, sinking into the chair as though her legs could no longer hold her. He poured hot water over mint leaves and handed her a cup. She wrapped her hands around it, breathing in the steam, and some of the tension left her shoulders. "I don't even know your name," she said quietly. "Sanish Red Fox," he replied. "I am Lakota. I hunt and trap in these mountains. I live alone. I'm Cecilia Shaw," she said. "This is my daughter Hazel. She just turned 6 last month. We came from Ohio originally, but we moved to Helena after my husband got work at the mine. And then she stopped, her voice breaking. She looked down at the cup in her hands. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You are alive," Sanish said simply. "That is enough for now." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Sanish watched her from the corner of his eye. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, though grief and hardship had carved lines around her eyes and mouth. Her hands were rough, the hands of a woman who knew hard work. Her dress was plain, patched in several places, the fabric worn thin. She had nothing, he realized. The wagon had held everything she owned, and now it was gone, smashed to pieces at the bottom of a canyon. "What will you do?" he asked finally. Cecilia looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no money, no supplies, nothing but the clothes on my back. I can't reach Fort Benton on foot, not with Hazel, and even if I could, I don't know if there's really work there, or if it was just something someone told me to make me feel better." Sanish considered this. He knew what the world did to women like her, women with no men to protect them, no money to buy safety. He had seen it before, in the towns and forts, the way they were ground down and used up until there was nothing left. He thought of his own mother, dead these 20 years, and how she had fought to keep him and his sister alive after their father was killed. He remembered the desperation in her eyes, the way her hands had shaken when she handed them over to their grandmother. Knowing she could not feed them through the winter, "You will stay here," he said, the words coming before he had fully decided to speak them. Cecilia's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "You and the child. Until you are strong enough to travel." Until you know where you are going, I can't, Cecilia said immediately. You've already done so much. I can't ask you to. You did not ask, Sanish interrupted. I am offering. The mountains are no place for a woman and child alone. Winter comes early here. You would not survive a week, but what would I do? Cecilia asked, her voice small. I have nothing to give you, no way to repay you. Sanish looked at her, then at the cabin around them. It was clean, yes, but it was also bare, functional, a place built for survival rather than living. You could cook, he said. I eat what I hunt, but I do not cook well. You could mend. My clothes are torn. You could teach the child her letters. I have books. He gestured toward a small shelf where a dozen worn volumes sat. And when you are ready, when you know where you want to go, I will take you there. Cecilia stared at him, and he saw the moment she understood. He was offering her time. Time to heal, to think, to plan. Time to be more than just a woman running from one disaster toward another. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for us? Sanish was quiet for a long moment. He looked into the fire, watching the flames dance and shift. Because someone should, he said finally. Cecilia's breath hitched, and then she was crying, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She covered her face with her hands, and the tears came in great shuddering waves, all the fear and grief and exhaustion pouring out at once. Sanish did not move. He simply sat, bearing witness, letting her break apart in the safety of his hearth. When the storm passed, Cecilia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked at him. Her face was blotchy and swollen, but there was something new in her expression now. Hope, fragile as a bird's egg, but real. Thank you, she said, her voice hoarse. Thank you, Sanish Red Fox. He nodded once, then rose and moved to the workbench. He took down strips of dried venison and a small sack of cornmeal, then set about making a simple stew. Cecilia watched him work, and after a moment, she stood and came to help. He did not stop her. Together, in the warm glow of the hearth, they prepared a meal, and outside the cabin, night fell over the mountains like a blessing. The first morning came soft and gray, wrapped in mist that clung to the mountainside like sheep's wool. Cecilia woke to unfamiliar sounds, the crackle of a fire being stoked, the quiet scrape of a knife against whetstone, the distant call of a crow. For a moment, she could not remember where she was. Then she felt Hazel's warm weight pressed against her side, felt the thick furs covering them both, and memory crashed back like cold water. She sat up carefully, not wanting to wake her daughter. The cabin was dim, lit only by the glow of the hearth, and the pale light seeping through the single window. Sanish stood at the workbench, his back to her, sharpening a blade with long practiced strokes. He wore no shirt, only leather leggings and moccasins, and she could see the broad planes of his shoulders, the muscles shifting beneath copper skin, marked with old scars. His long black hair hung loose down his back, unbraided. He must have sensed her watching because he turned, and their eyes met across the room. You slept well, he said. It was not a question. Better than I have in months, Cecilia admitted. She pushed the furs aside and stood, suddenly aware of how wrinkled and dirty her dress was, how tangled her hair must be. She touched it self-consciously. Is there water I could use to wash? Sanish nodded toward a wooden bucket near the door. Cold, from the stream. If you want it warm, I will heat some. He set down the knife and pulled on a worn buckskin shirt, lacing it at the throat. There is a place downstream where you can bathe, private. The child can go with you. Cecilia felt heat rise in her cheeks. The thought of bathing, of being clean again, was almost overwhelming. That would be wonderful, she said quietly. Thank you. He heated water in the large pot, then poured it into 2 smaller pails. I will show you the way, he said. Then I must check my traps. I will return before midday. Hazel stirred on the bed, her eyes fluttering open. She sat up slowly, looking around with confusion until she saw her mother. "Mama?" she said, her voice small and uncertain. "I'm here, sweetheart," Cecilia said, crossing to her. She sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed Hazel's tangled hair. "We're safe, remember? The kind man saved us yesterday. His name is Sanish." Hazel's eyes found the tall Lakota man, and she studied him with the solemn intensity only children possess. "You caught me when I was falling," she said. "Yes," Sanish replied simply. "Thank you," Hazel said. And her small voice carried a weight of understanding that made Cecilia's throat tighten. Sanish knelt down so he was at the child's eye level. "You are brave," he told her. "Like a young wolf." "Your mother is brave too." Hazel considered this, then nodded seriously. "Mama is the bravest person I know." Something flickered across Sanish's face, too quick to name, and then he rose. "Come," he said. "I will take you to the water." The stream was a 15-minute walk from the cabin, following a narrow path that wound through dense pine and cedar. The mist was thicker here, turning the forest into something from a dream, all soft edges and muffled sounds. The stream itself was clear and cold, running over smooth stones, widening into a deep pool shaded by overhanging willows. It was indeed private, hidden from the main trail, a secret place. Sanish set down the pails of warm water on a flat rock. "Mix this with the cold water from the stream," he said. "It will be better for the child. I will go now. Call out when you are finished, and I will hear you." "Wait," Cecilia said, and he paused. "I don't know how to thank you for all this." "For everything. You do not need to thank me," Sanish said. "Just be safe. Watch for bears. They come to drink sometimes." And then he was gone, melting into the forest as silently as he had moved through it. Cecilia and Hazel stripped off their dirty clothes and waded into the pool, gasping at the cold. They scrubbed themselves with handfuls of sand from the stream, washing away days of dirt and fear and exhaustion. Cecilia poured the warm water over Hazel's head, working her fingers through the tangles, and her daughter laughed. A sound so pure and unexpected that it brought tears to Cecilia's eyes. When was the last time she had heard Hazel laugh? Not since before Thomas died, not since the world had turned dark and desperate. But here, in this hidden pool with mist hanging in the air, and birdsong echoing through the trees, her daughter was laughing again. They dressed in their still dirty clothes, having nothing else, and Cecilia called out as Sanish had instructed. He appeared moments later, as though he had been waiting just beyond sight. He looked at them, at their wet hair and clean faces, and gave a single nod of approval. "Better," he said. Then he reached into a leather bag slung over his shoulder and pulled out folded fabric. "For you." And the child, Cecilia took the bundle and unfolded it carefully. 2 dresses, simple but well made, in dark blue and brown cotton. They were too big, clearly meant for a larger woman, but they were clean and whole. "Where did these come from?" she asked. "They were my sister's," Sanish said. "She's been gone many years. They have no use in a trunk." He turned and started back toward the cabin, leaving no room for argument. Cecilia held the dresses against her chest and felt something crack open inside her. Some hard shell she had built around her heart. This man, the stranger who had every reason to send them away, kept giving them pieces of his past, pieces of himself. She did not understand it, but she was learning not to question it. Back at the cabin, Cecilia changed into the brown dress while Hazel wore the blue one, the hem dragging on the floor. Sanish took one look and without a word, produced a needle and thread from his supplies. He showed Cecilia where he kept fabric scraps, scissors, buttons, things his sister had left behind. "You can alter them," he said. "Make them fit." And so Cecilia's second morning in the cabin was spent sitting by the fire, sewing, while Hazel played quietly with small carved animals Sanish had made, a deer, a wolf, a bear. He worked at his bench, repairing a trap, occasionally glancing over at them. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the crackling fire and the soft whisper of thread through fabric. When Sanish left to check his traps that afternoon, he returned with 3 rabbits and a grouse. He showed Cecilia how to skin and clean them, his hands quick and efficient, never wasteful. She watched carefully, memorizing each step, knowing this was survival knowledge she might need. He hung the meat to drain, then built up the fire and set water to boil. "Can you cook this?" he asked, gesturing to the meat. Cecilia nodded. "I can make a stew. Do you have onions? Potatoes?" He produced a sack of small, wrinkled potatoes and a string of dried onions. "Also this," he said, handing her a twist of salt wrapped in cloth and a small jar of wild herbs. "Use what you need," Cecilia set to work, and Sanish watched her with quiet interest. She moved with confidence here, chopping and seasoning, tasting and adjusting. This was a language she spoke fluently, the language of making something from almost nothing. She browned the meat in a pan over the fire, added the vegetables and herbs, then poured in water and let it simmer. The smell that filled the cabin was rich and savory, utterly different from the simple roasted meat Sanish usually ate. When the stew was ready, Cecilia ladled it into wooden bowls. They sat together, the 3 of them, and ate. Sanish took the first bite, and something changed in his expression. He looked down at the bowl, then up at her. "This is good," he said, and there was surprise in his voice. "It's just stew," Cecilia said, but she felt a flush of pride. "It is more than I have tasted in a long time," Sanish replied quietly. That night, after Hazel had fallen asleep in the big bed, Cecilia and Sanish sat by the fire. He was carving something from a piece of cedar, long curls of wood falling away to reveal the shape of a bird. She mended one of his shirts, replacing the torn seam with careful stitches. "Tell me about your sister," Cecilia said softly. Sanish's hands paused for a moment, then continued their work. "Her name was Winona. She was 3 years younger than me. When our mother died, we lived with our grandmother. Winona was promised to a warrior from another band, a good match. But she loved someone else, a man our grandmother did not approve of. She ran away with him. I have not seen her in 8 years. Do you know where she is?" "North, in Canada, with the Siksika people. Her husband sent word 5 years ago. She has 3 children now. She is happy." He said it without emotion, but Cecilia heard the ache beneath the words. "You miss her," she said. "Every day," Sanish admitted. "But she chose her path, and I chose mine. That is how it is. What is your path?" Cecilia asked. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his dark eyes she could not name. "I do not know anymore," he said finally. "Once, I thought I would live with my people, hunt buffalo, raise children who knew the old ways. But the buffalo are gone. My people are scattered. The old ways are dying. So I came here, to the mountains, and I live alone. It is enough. It has to be, is it?" Cecilia pressed gently. "Enough?" Sanish set down his carving. "It was," he said. "Before yesterday." He did not elaborate, and Cecilia did not push. The days began to find a rhythm. Sanish would leave before dawn to check his traps and hunt. Cecilia would wake, build up the fire, and prepare a simple breakfast from whatever supplies were available. She would wash clothes in the stream, mend what needed mending, organize the cabin in small ways that made it feel more like a home. Hazel helped where she could, learning to stack firewood, to recognize edible plants, to move quietly through the forest in the afternoons. Cecilia would take down one of Sanish's books and read to Hazel. He had McGuffey readers, a worn Bible, a copy of Gulliver's Travels, and several books in Lakota that she could not read. She taught Hazel letters and numbers, drawing them in the dirt outside the cabin with a stick. Sanish would sometimes stop his work and listen, his expression unreadable, One evening, he asked, "Can you read Lakota?" "No," Cecilia said. "I only know English. Would you like to learn?" She looked at him in surprise. "You would teach me?" "If you wish," he said simply, and so began another ritual. After supper, after Hazel was asleep, Sanish would take down one of the Lakota books and teach Cecilia words. Taku, what? Tokeza, maybe. Waist, good. She repeated them carefully, her tongue stumbling over unfamiliar sounds, and he would correct her gently, patiently, until she got it right. "Why do you have books in Lakota?" she asked one night. "I thought your people did not write." "We did not," Sanish said. "But missionaries came, and they made a written language for us so they could translate the Bible. Some of our people learned it. My sister learned it. She wrote these books, copying down stories our grandmother told us, so they would not be forgotten." Cecilia looked at the book in her hands with new reverence. "They're precious then," she said. "Yes," Sanish agreed. "They are all I have of her, besides the dresses." 2 weeks passed, then 3. The aspens turned gold, and the nights grew colder. Sanish began preparing for winter, smoking meat, gathering firewood, checking the cabin for gaps that would let in the wind. Cecilia worked beside him, learning, helping, becoming part of the rhythm of this mountain life. She noticed things about him. The way he always gave Hazel the best portions of meat. The way he carved small toys for her, a doll, a whistle, a top. The way he never raised his voice, never showed impatience, even when Hazel asked him the same question 5 times. He was gentle with her daughter in a way Thomas had never been. Not because Thomas was cruel, but because he had been too tired. Too worn down by the mine and the struggle to survive. And she noticed the way Sanish looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention. Not with hunger, not with the predatory gaze she had learned to fear from men in Helena, but with something else. Curiosity, maybe.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Or recognition, as though he saw in her something familiar, something worth protecting. One afternoon, Cecilia was grinding corn into meal when Sanish came back early from his traps. His face was tight, his movements sharp with tension. "Someone is coming," he said. 3 riders from the east. They will be here within the hour." Fear shot through Cecilia like lightning. "Who are they?" "I do not know," Sanish said. "But they are following the trail to this cabin. It is not a trail many know. What do we do?" Cecilia asked, her heart pounding. Sanish looked at her, then at Hazel playing near the fire. His jaw tightened. "We wait," he said. "And we see what they want." He went outside and stood on the porch, his rifle held loosely in his hands, not threatening but ready. Cecilia pulled Hazel close and stood in the doorway, watching. The minutes stretched like hours. Then, through the trees, she heard it. The sound of horses' hooves crunching on fallen leaves. Voices rough and male. 3 men emerged from the forest. They rode poor horses, thin and tired. The men themselves looked harder, meaner, the kind of men Cecilia had learned to avoid in Helena. The one in front had a scar running from his eye to his jaw, and when he saw Sanish, he smiled, showing crooked teeth. "Well, well," the scarred man said, reining in his horse. "Didn't expect to find an Injun out here." "You alone?" "No," Sanish said flatly. The man's eyes flicked past him to the cabin, and Cecilia saw the moment he spotted her and Hazel in the doorway. His smile widened. "Got yourself a white woman, do you? How'd you manage that, redskin?" Sanish's grip on the rifle tightened, but his voice remained level. "State your business, then leave." The scarred man laughed. "Unfriendly, ain't he, boys?" The other 2 riders chuckled. "We're just passing through. Heard there was good trapping up here. Thought maybe we'd set up camp nearby, share the territory." "There is no sharing," Sanish said. This is my land. You will leave your land? The man said, his voice mocking. You got papers for that? A deed? Or are you just squatting here like all your kind do? Cecilia saw the muscles in Sanish's back go rigid. She stepped forward, despite her fear, and spoke clearly. This is his home. We ask you to respect that and move on. The scarred man's eyes settled on her, cold and assessing. You his woman? He asked. Or are you just staying here for convenience? That is none of your concern, Cecilia said, her voice shaking but firm. The man spat on the ground. Suit yourself, lady. But you ought to know, winter's coming. Awful cold to spend with nothing but a savage for warmth. He turned his horse. We'll be setting up camp about a mile west. Just so you know, you got neighbors now. The three men rode away, their laughter echoing back through the trees. Sanish stood motionless until the sound faded completely. Then he lowered the rifle and turned to Cecilia. His face was carved from stone. They will come back, he said. Men like that always do. Cecilia felt cold dread settling in her stomach. What do they want? Whatever they can take, Sanish said grimly. Furs, supplies, maybe more. He looked at her, and she saw the decision forming behind his eyes. I should take you to Fort Benton tomorrow. You and the child. It is not safe here anymore. No, Cecilia said, surprising herself with her vehemence. We're not leaving, Cecilia. You saved our lives, she said fiercely. You took us in when we had nothing. I won't let those men drive us away. I won't. Sanish stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or something deeper. Then we prepare, he said finally. And we do not let them see us as weak. That night, neither of them slept well. Cecilia lay in the bed with Hazel, listening to every sound outside, every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves. Across the room, Sanish sat by the fire, his rifle across his knees, watching the door. And somewhere out in the darkness, three men sat around their own fire, planning. The trouble started small, like most disasters do. 3 days after the scarred men arrived, Sanish returned from checking his northern trapline to find it destroyed. Every trap had been sprung deliberately, crushed with rocks or torn apart with tools. The furs he had set to cure on stretching frames near the stream were gone, slashed free and carried off. An entire week's work vanished. He stood in the clearing, jaw clenched tight, staring at the wreckage. This was not the work of animals. This was a message, crude and clear. We can take what we want, whenever we want. He gathered what remained and headed back to the cabin, his mind already calculating. Winter supplies. Money from pelts. Time lost. Cecilia saw his face when he emerged from the forest and knew immediately something was wrong. She was outside hanging laundry on a rope stretched between two trees, Hazel at her feet collecting smooth pebbles. What happened? She asked. They took my traps, Sanish said flatly. Destroyed what they could not carry. Cecilia's hands stilled on the wet shirt she was hanging. The men from before? Yes, we should report this, Cecilia said. There must be a marshal, someone who enforces the law out here. Sanish gave her a look that was almost pitying. The nearest marshal is in Fort Benton, 4 days' ride. And he will not care about a Lakota trapper losing furs. He will tell me I should have stayed on the reservation. That's not right, Cecilia said, anger flaring in her chest. No, Sanish agreed. But it is true. That afternoon, he rode to where the men had made camp. Cecilia begged him not to go, but he refused to hide. He found them exactly where the scarred man had said they would be. A crude campsite with 3 bedrolls around a fire ring and his stolen furs hanging from a tree branch. The scarred man looked up as Sanish approached and grinned. Lose something, Chief? He called out. Sanish dismounted and stood with his hands loose at his sides, not reaching for his rifle. Return what you took, he said quietly. And leave this territory. The scarred man stood, and his two companions rose with him. They were all armed, pistols on their hips, rifles within reach. Or what? The man asked. You gonna scalp us? Do a war dance? His companions laughed. I ask once more, Sanish said, his voice dropping lower. Return what is mine. Tell you what, the scarred man said, stepping closer. You bring that white woman around, let us get to know her proper, and maybe we'll consider it. She must be lonely, shacking up with a savage. Probably grateful for the company of civilized men. Sanish moved. Fast as a striking snake, his fist connected with the man's jaw, sending him sprawling backward into the dirt. The other two went for their guns, but Sanish already had his rifle up and leveled. Touch your weapons and die, he said, and something in his voice made them freeze. The scarred man pushed himself up, wiping blood from his split lip. His eyes were murderous. You're a dead man, he hissed. You just don't know it yet. Sanish backed toward his horse, rifle still trained on them. Stay away from my cabin, he said. Stay away from the woman and child. If I see you near them, I will not ask questions. I will shoot. He mounted and rode away, knowing he had just made everything worse. But some things could not be left unsaid. Some lines had to be drawn. When he returned to the cabin, Cecilia took one look at his bloodied knuckles and simply heated water without asking. She cleaned his hand carefully, wrapping it in cloth torn from one of her petticoats. You hit him, she said. Yes, good, she said fiercely. And when she looked up at him, her gray eyes were blazing. I'm glad. Sanish felt something shift in his chest, something that had been locked away for years. This woman, this fragile-looking widow with her quiet strength and fierce heart, was glad he had defended her honor. She was not afraid of him. She was not ashamed to be under his protection. She was angry on his behalf. They will retaliate, he warned her. This is not over. Then we'll be ready, Cecilia said. That night, Sanish taught her to load and fire his spare rifle. They went into the forest away from the cabin, and he showed her how to hold it against her shoulder, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger gently rather than jerk it. She was clumsy at first, the recoil knocking her back, but she learned quickly. By the time darkness fell, she could hit a tree trunk at 30 paces. You are a good student, Sanish said. I have a good teacher, Cecilia replied, and in the twilight, their eyes met and held for a long moment before she looked away. Color rising in her cheeks, the attack came 2 nights later. Sanish woke to the smell of smoke and was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Through the window, he saw flames licking at the corner of his woodshed. Someone had set it on fire, and if it spread to the cabin, they would all burn. Cecilia, he barked, and she jerked awake. Fire! Get Hazel out, go to the stream. Now, she did not argue, did not waste time with questions. She scooped Hazel from the bed, wrapping her in a blanket, and ran for the door. Sanish covered them as they fled into the darkness, his eyes scanning the tree line. He saw movement, shadows shifting between trunks, and fired once. A yelp of pain confirmed the hit. He ran to the woodshed and began throwing burning logs away from the main structure, beating at flames with a wet blanket. The heat scorched his face and hands, but he kept working, desperate to save what had taken him years to build. Behind him, he heard footsteps and spun, rifle coming up. The scarred man stood 10 feet away, pistol drawn and pointed at Sanish's chest. His face was twisted with rage, and blood stained his shirt where Sanish's bullet had grazed his shoulder. Should have stayed on the reservation, Redskin, he snarled. The gun fired. The sound was deafening in the night air. But Sanish was already moving, dropping and rolling, and the bullet whined past where his head had been. He came up with his rifle and fired from the hip. The scarred man went down hard, clutching his leg, screaming. The other 2 men broke from the trees, firing wildly. Sanish dove behind the water trough, bullets splintering wood above his head. He returned fire once, twice, and one of the men fell. The last one turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush like a panicked deer. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of dying flames and the scarred man's groaning. Sanish approached carefully, rifle ready, and kicked the man's pistol away. "You are done here," he said coldly. "Take your friend and go. If I see you again, I will not aim for your leg." The scarred man's face was pale with pain and fear. "You'll hang for this," he spat. "Killing white men. I killed no one," Sanish said. "But I will if you force me. Now go." He dragged the wounded man to where his companion lay groaning with a bullet in his shoulder, threw them both over their horses, and sent the animals trotting east with slaps to their rumps. Then he turned to the smoldering remains of his woodshed and began the work of salvaging what he could. Cecilia emerged from the darkness, Hazel clutched tight in her arms. Her face was stark white, her eyes huge. "I heard shooting," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought, I am alive," Sanish said. "They are gone," she set Hazel down, and walked straight to him, her hands reaching up to touch his face, his shoulders, checking for wounds. "You're hurt," she said, seeing the burns on his hands. "It is nothing. It's not nothing," she said fiercely, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "You could have died. They could have killed you, and we would have been alone again, and I can't." She pressed her hands to her face, trying to muffle the sounds. Sanish stood frozen for a moment, uncertain. Then, slowly, he reached out and pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her. She collapsed into him, her fingers clutching at his shirt, and he held her while she wept. Over her head, he saw Hazel watching them with solemn eyes, and he reached out one hand to her. The child came and pressed herself against both of them, and they stood there in the smoking ruins, three people clinging to each other in the darkness. "You are safe," Sanish said quietly, his lips against Cecilia's hair. "I will keep you safe." "I know," she whispered. "I know you will." The next morning revealed the full extent of the damage. The woodshed was destroyed, half his winter supply of firewood turned to ash. The vegetable garden Cecilia had been tending was trampled, torn up deliberately. His last remaining trapline had been found and destroyed while he fought the fire. They had lost so much, but they were alive. And as Sanish surveyed the wreckage, Cecilia came to stand beside him. "We'll rebuild," she said simply. "We'll gather more wood. Plant again in the spring. Winter is coming," Sanish said. "I do not have enough furs to trade for supplies. The wood I lost will be hard to replace before the first snow." Cecilia reached into her pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it slowly, revealing a ring, simple gold, worn thin. "This was my wedding ring," she said. "It's all I have left from my old life. We can sell it in Fort Benton, buy what we need." Sanish stared at the ring, then at her. "I cannot take that from you." "You're not taking it," Cecilia said. "I'm giving it. Thomas is gone. That life is gone. This is my life now here, with you and Hazel, and I will do whatever it takes to protect it." Something in Sanish's chest cracked open, something he had thought long dead. He looked at this woman, this fierce, stubborn, beautiful woman who had appeared in his life like a miracle, and he knew. He knew with absolute certainty that he would die before he let anything happen to her. "We will go to Fort Benton together," he said. "All three of us. We will sell the ring, buy supplies, and return before the snow. And then," he paused, searching for words in a language that was not his own. "And then we will face whatever comes." "Together," Cecilia smiled, and it was like sunrise after a long night. "Together," she agreed. They left 2 days later, Sanish on his horse with Hazel riding in front of him, Cecilia on a sturdy pack mule he borrowed from a trapper he trusted. The journey to Fort Benton took 3 days of hard travel, through mountain passes already dusted with early snow, across rivers running cold and fast with meltwater. At night, they camped under the stars, and Sanish taught Cecilia how to read. The sky, how to find direction by the North Star, how to listen to the forest and know if danger approached. Hazel bloomed under the adventure of it, asking endless questions, collecting interesting rocks and feathers, chattering about everything. She saw. And in those moments, riding through wild country with the child's laughter ringing out and Cecilia's quiet presence beside him, Sanish felt something he had not felt in years. He felt happy. Fort Benton was a sprawling, rough settlement clinging to the banks of the Missouri River. It smelled of mud and horses and unwashed humanity, and the noise was overwhelming after weeks of mountain silence. They rode down the main street, drawing stares. A Lakota man, a white woman, and a child, an unusual sight, they found a trading post run by a grizzled old Scotsman named McGregor, who asked no questions and offered fair prices. Cecilia handed over her ring, and Sanish watched her face as McGregor weighed it, tested it, and named a price. She did not flinch, did not hesitate. She simply nodded. With the money, they bought flour, salt, sugar, coffee, cornmeal, dried beans, ammunition, 2 thick wool blankets, and a box of cartridges for the rifle. McGregor threw in a bag of peppermint sticks for Hazel, and the child's squeal of delight made even the gruff Scotsman smile. As they loaded their supplies onto the mule, a man approached. He was tall, clean-shaven, wearing the uniform of a U.S. Marshal. His eyes were cold as he looked Sanish up and down. "You're a long way from the reservation, Indian," he said. "I do not live on a reservation," Sanish replied evenly. "I am a free man." "That so?" the marshal said. "And this woman? She with you willingly, or did you take her?" Cecilia stepped forward, her chin lifted. "I am with him by choice, sir. He saved my life and my daughter's life. We are under his protection." The marshal's eyes narrowed. "Protection? That what you call it?" He spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. "Ma'am, if you're in trouble, if this savage has forced you into anything, you just say the word, and I'll handle it." "The only trouble I've had," Cecilia said, her voice sharp as broken glass, "came from white men who attacked our home and tried to burn us out. This man defended us. He has shown more honor and decency than any so-called civilized person I've met in this territory." The marshal's face darkened. "Careful, ma'am. Words like that could get you in trouble. Are we breaking any laws?" "Marshal?" Cecilia asked. "Well, no, but then we'll be going," she said, and turned her back on him. Sanish followed, hiding his smile, and they left Fort Benton with their supplies and their dignity intact. That night, camped in a grove of cottonwoods beside the river, Cecilia sat close to the fire while Hazel slept wrapped in one of the new blankets. Sanish was checking the mule's pack when Cecilia spoke. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He looked up. "For what?" "For what that marshal said. For the way people look at you, at us. It's not fair." Sanish came and sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I am used to it," he said. "I have lived with those looks my whole life." "You shouldn't have to," Cecilia said fiercely. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually stern face. "You are angry for me again," he said. "I like when you are angry for me," she laughed, a surprised sound that bubbled up from her chest. "Someone has to be. You're too calm about it, because I have you to be angry for me," he said, and the teasing note in his voice made her look at him sharply. Their eyes met, and suddenly the air between them felt charged, electric. Cecilia's breath caught. Sanish's smile faded, replaced by something intense and searching. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Cecilia," he said, her name rough in his throat. "Yes," she whispered, though he had not asked a question. He leaned in, and she met him halfway, and their lips touched soft and tentative at first, then deeper, more certain. She tasted like smoke and coffee, and something sweet he could not name. Her hand came up to rest against his chest, and he could feel his heart thundering beneath her palm. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cecilia's eyes were bright with tears. "I didn't think I could feel this way again," she said. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of me was dead too." "You are not dead," Sanish said, his forehead resting against hers. "You are the most alive person I have ever known. What are we doing?" she asked, half laughing, half crying. "This is madness. The world will never accept us. Then the world can look away," Sanish said. "I do not care what they think. I only care what you think." Cecilia pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "I think," she said slowly, "that I am falling in love with you, Sanish Red Fox. And it terrifies me." "Good," he said, and kissed her again. "Because I am already in love with you, and I have been terrified for weeks." They held each other as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead. Two people who had found each other against all odds, determined to hold on no matter what came next. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountain peaks with teeth of ice and claws of wind. The first snow fell the day after they returned from Fort Benton, thick heavy flakes that blanketed the forest in silence. Sanish stood on the porch watching it accumulate, calculating. They had supplies now, enough to survive, but the destroyed woodshed meant less shelter for fuel, and the winter promised to be harsh inside. Cecilia stirred a pot of beans over the fire, while Hazel practiced her letters on a slate Sanish had traded for in town. The cabin felt smaller now, more intimate, since that night by the river. Neither of them had spoken directly about what had passed between them, but it hummed in the air like a plucked string, present in every glance, every accidental touch. "Snow's heavy," Cecilia said, coming to stand beside him. "Will we be snowed in?" "Possibly," Sanish admitted. "Some winters the passes close completely until spring. We could be alone here for months." She looked up at him, her gray eyes searching his face. "Would that be so terrible?" "No," he said quietly. "It would not be terrible at all. That first week of winter established their new patterns." Sanish spent his mornings reinforcing the cabin, stuffing gaps in the logs with moss and clay, building a makeshift lean-to to replace the destroyed woodshed. Cecilia organized their supplies with meticulous care, rationing everything to ensure they would last. She made bread from the flour, stretching it with ground acorns she had gathered before the snow. She rendered fat from the game Sanish brought back, making soap and candles. Nothing was wasted. Hazel became their weather gauge, their measure of normalcy. She played elaborate games with her carved animals, creating entire worlds in the space beside the hearth. She sang songs Cecilia had taught her, and sometimes Sanish would hum along in harmony, low and rumbling. The child had stopped flinching at loud noises, stopped looking toward the door with fear. She was healing, growing strong, one evening. As wind howled outside and snow piled against the walls, Sanish sat at his workbench crafting something from a piece of antler. Cecilia watched his hands move, sure and practiced, and felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "What are you making?" she asked. "A comb," he said. "For you. Your hair gets tangled and you use your fingers. A comb would be better." She came and stood behind him, looking over his shoulder at the delicate work. He was carving teeth into the antler, each one even and smooth. "That's beautiful," she whispered. He paused and tilted his head back to look at her. Their faces were inches apart. "You are beautiful," he said simply, and her breath caught. She bent down and kissed him, soft and sweet, her hand coming up to cup his jaw. He turned in his chair and pulled her into his lap, and the antler comb fell forgotten to the floor. They kissed deeply, hungrily, months of longing and restraint finally breaking through. His hands tangled in her hair, and she pressed herself against him, feeling the solid strength of his body. "Mama?" Hazel's sleepy voice cut through the moment like cold water. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and found the child sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes. I'm thirsty. Cecilia stood quickly, smoothing her dress, her cheeks flaming. Of course, sweetheart. I'll get you water. She avoided Sanish's eyes as she moved to the water bucket. But she could feel him watching her, could sense the smile playing at his lips. After Hazel had drunk and settled back to sleep, Cecilia returned to her own side of the room, to the bed she shared with her daughter. Sanish remained at his workbench, picking up the comb and returning to his work. But something had shifted between them, some invisible boundary crossed. They both knew it. They both felt the inevitability of what was building. The second week brought a cold snap so severe that frost formed on the inside of the walls. They huddled close to the fire, burning through wood faster than Sanish liked. He went out each day to gather more, trudging through snow that reached his knees, but the nearby dead wood was running out. He would have to venture farther into the deeper forest. I'll come with you, Cecilia said when he mentioned this. Too dangerous, Sanish replied. The snow hides crevasses, weak ice over streams. One wrong step, then teach me to see what you see, she insisted.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
I can't just sit here uselessly while you risk yourself. He studied her determined face and knew arguing would be futile. Tomorrow, he said. We go together. But you do exactly as I say when I say it. Yes, she agreed. They left before dawn, with Hazel still sleeping under a pile of furs. Sanish had asked a trapper friend who lived a mile south to check on the cabin, had left instructions and payment. The man was trustworthy, one of the few. They moved through the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts, Sanish breaking trail and Cecilia following in his footsteps. He showed her how to test snow depth with a stick, how to read the landscape for hidden dangers, how to move efficiently through deep powder. They reached a stand of dead pines an hour's walk from the cabin and began the work of cutting and hauling. Cecilia proved stronger than she looked, working steadily despite the cold that bit through layers of clothing. They spoke little, saving their breath for labor, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. On the journey back, dragging a sled loaded with wood, they paused to rest. Sanish built a small fire and melted snow for drinking water. They sat close together, sharing warmth, and Cecilia leaned her head against his shoulder. I never knew I could do this, she said softly. Be this strong. When Thomas was alive, I just cooked and cleaned and tried to keep Hazel quiet so he could rest. I felt like I was disappearing, becoming smaller every day. You were never small, Sanish said. You were just in the wrong place. She lifted her head to look at him. And this is the right place? A cabin in the wilderness, snowed in with a Lakota hunter? Is it? He asked, and there was vulnerability in his voice she had never heard before. Yes, she said without hesitation. It is. He kissed her then, cold lips warming against hers, and she kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling. We should get back to Hazel, she said. Yes, he agreed. But neither of them moved for a long moment. The third week brought wolves. Sanish heard them first, their howls echoing through the frozen forest at night. They were close, too close, driven down from the high country by hunger. He reinforced the door, checked his ammunition, kept the rifle always within reach. One night, they came right up to the cabin, drawn by the smell of smoked meat. Sanish went out with a torch and fired a shot into the air, and the pack melted back into the trees, but he knew they would return. How many? Cecilia asked when he came back inside. 6, maybe 7, he said. A large pack. They are desperate. That night, Hazel had nightmares. She woke screaming about wolves with red eyes and teeth like knives. Cecilia held her, rocked her, sang to her, but the child would not settle. Finally, Sanish came and lifted Hazel into his arms. He carried her to his own sleeping mat and lay down with her, the child curled against his chest. He began to speak in Lakota, his voice low and rhythmic, telling her a story about the wolf and the rabbit, about respect and balance and the circle of life. Hazel did not understand the words, but the sound of his voice soothed her. Her breathing slowed, deepened, and she slept. Cecilia watched from across the room, her heart so full it ached. This man, this strong, gentle man who had been alone for so long, held her daughter like she was precious, like she mattered. And Cecilia knew with absolute certainty that she loved him, completely and irrevocably. In the morning, she found him still there. Hazel sprawled across him like a starfish, both of them sleeping peacefully. She knelt beside them and touched his face gently. His eyes opened, dark and deep, and locked with hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "She is mine too," he said simply. And Cecilia felt tears prick her eyes. The fourth week brought a thaw, brief and treacherous. The temperature rose just enough to turn snow to slush, making travel impossible. They were truly trapped now, but it did not feel like imprisonment. The cabin had become a world unto itself, complete and sufficient. They fell into deeper rhythms, anticipating each other's needs, moving around each other with unconscious grace. Sanish taught Cecilia to speak more Lakota. She taught him to read English more fluently, stumbling over words but persistent. Hazel learned from both of them, becoming a bridge between two worlds. One evening, the child announced solemnly that when she grew up, she wanted to be a hunter like Sanish. He smiled and said that would be good. The world needed more women who could take care of themselves. "Will you teach me?" Hazel asked. "If your mother permits it," Sanish said, glancing at Cecilia. Cecilia thought of the woman she had been a year ago, timid and dependent, afraid of shadows. She thought of the woman she was becoming, strong and capable, unafraid. "Yes," she said. "Teach her everything." The wolves returned on the night of the new moon, when darkness was absolute. Sanish woke to the sound of scratching at the door, low growls, the thud of bodies against wood. He rose silently, taking his rifle, and moved to the window. In the faint starlight, he could see them, gray shadows circling the cabin. Testing for weakness, he fired through the window, and one wolf yelped and fled. The others scattered, but did not go far. He reloaded, waiting. Cecilia was awake now, holding Hazel, both of them silent and wide-eyed. The scratching came again, this time at the back wall where the chinking was weakest. Sanish moved quickly, firing through a gap in the logs. Another yelp, another retreat. This continued through the night, the wolves probing and Sanish defending, until finally gray dawn crept across the snow and the pack withdrew. Sanish slumped against the wall, exhausted, and Cecilia came to him. She took the rifle from his shaking hands and set it aside, then wrapped her arms around him. "It's over," she said. "You kept us safe. For now," he said. "They will come again, then we'll be ready again," she said firmly. That afternoon, while Hazel napped and the cabin was quiet, Cecilia found Sanish outside examining the damage to the walls. She came and stood beside him, not speaking, just present. After a moment, he turned to her. "Cecilia," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I need to say something." "Then say it," she encouraged. "When you came here, I thought I was helping you, saving you and the child. But you have saved me too. I was not living before, just surviving. You brought life back to this place, to me. I do not know what the future holds, what the world will say about us, but I know this. I want you here. I want Hazel here. I want us to be a family, real and true. If you will have me." Cecilia felt tears streaming down her face, hot against her cold cheeks. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Sanish. I want that too. I want all of it." He pulled her close and kissed her, deep and claiming, and she melted into him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have nothing to offer you," he said. No wealth, no status, only this cabin and this life. That's everything, Cecilia said fiercely. That's more than I ever dreamed of having. They went inside together, hands clasped, and began to plan. They would stay through the winter, survive until spring. And then, when the passes opened, they would go to Fort Benton. They would find a preacher or a judge, someone who would marry them properly, make it legal and binding. They would face whatever judgment came, together. That night, after Hazel was asleep, Cecilia did not go to her own bed. She crossed the room to where Sanish lay on his mat and knelt beside him. He looked up at her, question in his eyes. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. "I have never been more certain of anything," she said, and lay down beside him. He wrapped his arms around her, and she pressed herself against the solid warmth of him. They did not make love, not with Hazel sleeping nearby. But they held each other through the long winter night. Two souls who had found each other against all odds, determined never to let go. The 5th week brought a blizzard that lasted 3 days. Snow piled so high against the door they could not open it, trapped inside by walls of white. But inside the cabin was warm, filled with the smell of baking bread and simmering stew. With Hazel's laughter and quiet conversation. With love growing deeper and stronger with each passing hour. On the 3rd day, when the storm finally broke and Sanish dug them out, they emerged to find the world transformed. The forest was buried under 6 feet of fresh snow, pristine and beautiful and deadly. But they had survived. They had more than survived. They had found something rare and precious, something worth fighting for. Sanish stood on the porch, looking out at the white wilderness, and felt Cecilia's hand slip into his. Hazel stood on his other side, and he lifted her up onto his shoulders. "What do you see?" the child asked. "I see home," Sanish said simply. "I see our future." And for the first time in his life, that future looked bright. Spring came slowly to the mountains, reluctant and uncertain. The snow began to recede in patches, revealing brown earth, and the first tentative shoots of green. Ice on the stream cracked and broke apart, rushing downstream in chunks that gleamed like broken glass in the sun. The air lost its bitter edge, and birds returned, filling the forest with song after months of silence. Sanish stood at the edge of the clearing, watching meltwater carve new channels through the mud. Behind him, the cabin door opened, and Cecilia emerged carrying a basket of wet laundry. She had grown stronger over the winter, her frame filling out with the regular meals and hard work, her face losing the gaunt hollows of desperate poverty. She looked healthy, vibrant, alive. "The pass should be clear within 2 weeks," he said without turning around. "Maybe sooner if the warm weather holds." Cecilia came to stand beside him, setting down her basket. "And then we go to Fort Benton," she said quietly. "Yes," he confirmed. "To make it official. To marry." She slipped her hand into his, and he squeezed gently. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Of marrying you?" "No," he said. "Of what comes after, perhaps. The judgment. The stares. The people who will say we are wrong. Let them say it," Cecilia replied with quiet fierceness. "I stopped caring what narrow minds think the day I realized you were the best man I have ever known." He turned to her then, cupping her face in his calloused hands. "You are the strongest woman I have ever met," he said. "And I am proud to stand beside you." They kissed, soft and lingering, until Hazel's voice called from inside. "Mama, can I go exploring?" The child had grown restless with the thaw, eager to venture beyond the cabin after months of confinement. "Not alone," Cecilia called back. "Wait for Sanish," he smiled against her lips. "Duty calls," he murmured, and she laughed that afternoon. Sanish took Hazel into the awakening forest to check his trap lines, newly reset after the winter. The child chattered endlessly, pointing out animal tracks in the mud, asking questions about every plant and bird they encountered. She had her mother's curiosity and quick mind, and teaching her brought Sanish unexpected joy. When you marry Mama, will you be my papa? Hazel asked suddenly, with the directness of children. Sanish stopped walking and knelt down so he was eye level with her. Would you want that? He asked carefully. Hazel nodded solemnly. I had a papa before, but he was always sad and tired. You're not sad. You smile now. You smile at Mama and you smile at me, and it makes me happy. Something tightened in Sanish's chest. Then yes, he said, his voice rough. I would be honored to be your papa. She threw her small arms around his neck and hugged him fiercely. He closed his eyes and held her. This child who had come into his life by chance and claimed a piece of his heart he did not know was empty. When they returned to the cabin with 2 rabbits and a grouse, Cecilia took one look at their faces and knew something had changed. What happened? She asked. I have a papa now, Hazel announced proudly, and Cecilia's eyes filled with tears. That evening, as they prepared supper together, Sanish felt a contentment he had never known. This was what family meant, he realized. Not blood, not tribe, but choice. The daily choosing to stand together, to build something larger than oneself. He had been alone so long he had forgotten what it felt like to belong. 2 days later, a rider appeared at the edge of the clearing. Sanish saw him first and immediately reached for his rifle, but the man raised both hands in a gesture of peace. I mean no harm, he called out. I have a message from Fort Benton. Sanish approached cautiously, Cecilia hanging back with Hazel. The rider was young, barely 20, wearing the rough clothes of a courier. He pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag and held it out. This came through the territorial office, he said. They asked me to deliver it since I was headed this way. Sanish took the paper, frowning. He could not imagine who would send him correspondence. He unfolded it slowly and began to read, his English still halting but functional. As he absorbed the words, his expression darkened. What is it? Cecilia asked, coming closer. It is from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Sanish said slowly. They say I am required to report to the Crow Reservation within 30 days. That all Lakota and Montana territory must be accounted for and placed on tribal lands. If I do not comply, they will send agents to collect me. The courier shifted uncomfortably. They're cracking down on Indians living off reservation, he said. New policy from Washington. I'm sorry. After the courier left, they sat at the table in stunned silence. Hazel played quietly near the fire, sensing the adult tension. What will you do? Cecilia finally asked. I will not go, Sanish said flatly. I left the reservation system years ago. I will not return to it. But if they send agents, then I will leave Montana, he said. Go north to Canada, where my sister is. The Canadian government does not enforce the same restrictions. Cecilia's face went pale. And what about us? She whispered. What about Hazel and me? Sanish looked at her, at the fear and hurt in her eyes, and felt his resolve crack. You would come with me, he said. All of us together, to Canada? Cecilia said. To start over again in a strange land with no money, no connections? She pressed her hands to her face. Sanish, I can't keep running. Hazel needs stability, schooling, a real home. This is your real home, he said desperately. Here, with me. A home they can take away anytime they want, she said, tears streaming down her face. Don't you see? We have no legal standing. No protection. They could take you from us or force us to leave, and we would have no recourse. The truth of her words hung between them like a blade. Sanish stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the land he had made his own through years of solitary work. There must be another way, he said. Cecilia came and stood behind him, resting her forehead against his back. Then we find it, she said. Together, the next morning, they prepared to leave for Fort Benton earlier than planned. If they were to marry, if they were to have any legal protection against what was coming, it needed to happen now. Sanish packed supplies while Cecilia dressed Hazel in her best clothes, the blue dress she had altered from Winona's things. They would take everything of value, not knowing if they would be able to return. The journey to Fort Benton took 4 days this time, the trails muddy and treacherous with snowmelt. They traveled in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the uncertain future. When they finally rode into the settlement, it felt different than before. More threatening, more hostile. They found lodging in a boarding house run by a German widow who asked no questions as long as payment was made in advance. Then Sanish went in search of someone who could perform a marriage ceremony. This proved harder than expected. The first minister he found, a thin man with hard eyes, refused outright. "I will not bless a union between a white woman and a savage," he said flatly. The second minister was more polite but no more helpful. "I sympathize with your situation," he said, "but my congregation would never accept it. I would lose my position." By the third day, Sanish was ready to give up. They sat in their small room at the boarding house, Hazel asleep between them, and faced the possibility that no one would marry them. "Perhaps we do not need their blessing," he said bitterly. "We know what we are to each other, but the law doesn't," Cecilia said. "Without a legal marriage, I have no claim to you. If they take you to the reservation, I cannot follow. If something happens to you, I have no rights. Hazel has no rights. We would be back where we started, with nothing." A knock on the door interrupted them. Sanish opened it cautiously to find the German landlady standing there. "I could not help but overhear," she said in her accented English. "You are looking for someone to marry you, yes?" "Yes," Cecilia said, coming forward. "But no one will. There is a man," the landlady interrupted. "Justice of the peace, retired now, but he still performs civil ceremonies. His name is Barnabas Fletcher. He lives on the edge of town, the house with the blue shutters. He might help you. Why would he?" Sanish asked suspiciously. The landlady smiled sadly. "Because his daughter married a Chinese railway worker 20 years ago, and no one would perform their ceremony either. He did it himself, and the town shunned him for it. But his daughter was happy, and that mattered more to him than their approval." Hope flickered in Cecilia's chest. "Where can we find him?" They went the next morning, all 3 of them, and found the house with blue shutters at the end of a dusty street. Barnabas Fletcher was an old man, white-haired and bent, but his eyes were sharp and kind. He listened to their story without interruption, then nodded slowly. "The law says I can marry you," he said. "Whether the law is right or wrong, that's between you and your conscience. But I see 2 people who love each other, and a child who needs a family. That's enough for me." Relief washed over them like rain. "When?" Cecilia asked. "Right now, if you like," Fletcher said. No sense waiting, so they were married in the parlor of a stranger's house, with only the German landlady as witness. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration. But when Barnabas Fletcher pronounced them husband and wife, when Sanish kissed Cecilia with Hazel clinging to both their legs, it felt more real and true than any grand ceremony could have been. Fletcher prepared the marriage certificate carefully, his handwriting precise. "This is a legal document," he said. "It gives you protection under territorial law. Not complete protection, mind you. There are still those who will challenge it, who will make your lives difficult. But it is something. It is proof." Sanish took the paper with reverent care and tucked it into his shirt, close to his heart. "Thank you," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They stayed in Fort Benton 2 more days, using the time to purchase additional supplies and make inquiries about the Indian Affairs Bureau. What they learned was not encouraging. The policy of relocating all native peoples to reservations was being enforced with increasing severity. There were stories of families torn apart, of men arrested and transported in chains, of resistance met with violence. "We need to leave Montana," Sanish said finally. "The marriage certificate gives us some protection, but not enough. If they are determined to take me, a piece of paper will not stop them. Where will we go? Cecilia asked. North, he said. To my sister in Canada. She has land there, a community. We can build a new cabin, start fresh. Cecilia looked around the small boarding house room, at their meager belongings packed and ready. She thought of the cabin in the mountains, the home they had made together, and felt grief lance through her. But she also thought of Hazel, of the future they wanted to build, and knew there was no real choice. All right, she said. When do we leave? 3 days, Sanish said. I need to trade for better horses and winter gear. The journey will be long and dangerous. That afternoon, while Sanish was at the trading post, Cecilia took Hazel to the general store to purchase fabric for new clothes. As they browsed the bolts of cloth, a woman approached, well-dressed and coldly beautiful. You're the one who married the Indian, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Cecilia straightened her spine. I married my husband, yes, the woman's lip curled. You should be ashamed. Degrading yourself like that, and with a child to think of. What kind of mother are you? Before Cecilia could respond, Hazel stepped forward, small fists clenched. He's my papa now, she said fiercely. And he's good and kind, and you're just mean. The woman recoiled as if struck. Several other shoppers had turned to watch, some nodding in agreement with the woman, others looking uncomfortable. Cecilia took Hazel's hand and held her head high. My daughter is right, she said clearly. My husband is a good man. Better than most I have met in so-called civilized society. And I am proud to stand beside him. She paid for her purchases and left, Hazel's hand tight in hers. Outside, the child looked up at her with worried eyes. Did I do wrong, Mama? She asked. No, sweetheart, Cecilia said, kneeling down to hug her. You did exactly right. You defended our family. I am so proud of you. When they returned to the boarding house, Sanish was waiting with good news. He had traded successfully for 2 strong horses and had found a guide who knew the trails north, a Metis man named Laurent who asked no questions and judged no one. They would leave in 2 days, that night, lying in bed with Sanish's arms around her and Hazel sleeping peacefully beside them. Cecilia allowed herself to imagine their future. A new home in Canada, surrounded by Sanish's sister's family. Hazel growing up free and loved, learning 2 cultures, belonging to both. Maybe other children, brothers and sisters for Hazel. A life built on choice and courage rather than desperation. Are you afraid? Sanish whispered in the darkness. Terrified, Cecilia admitted. But also hopeful. Is that strange? No, he said, pulling her closer. It is human. We are leaving behind everything we know for everything we hope for. That is always frightening. But we do it together, and that makes all the difference. She turned in his arms and kissed him deeply. I love you, Sanish Red Fox, she said. My husband, I love you, Cecilia Red Fox, he replied. And the name sounded right, felt right, as if it had always been hers, on their last morning in Fort Benton. They went to have their photograph taken. It cost precious money they could ill afford, but Cecilia insisted. So Hazel will remember, she said. So she will know we were not ashamed, that we stood together proudly. The photographer was reluctant at first, uncomfortable with the mixed-race family, but Sanish's steady gaze and Cecilia's quiet determination wore him down. They posed stiffly in their best clothes, Hazel standing between them, and when the flash powder exploded, capturing their image forever, Cecilia felt a sense of completion. They collected the photograph an hour later. A small tin-type image of 3 people who looked like a family because they were one. Sanish studied it for a long moment, his thumb tracing over Cecilia's face. Then carefully wrapped it and tucked it away, as they rode out of Fort Benton the next dawn. Heading north toward an uncertain future, Cecilia did not look back. She kept her eyes forward, on the horizon where possibility waited, on the strong back of the man she loved riding ahead of her, on the child nestled against her chest. They were headed into the unknown, but they were headed there together. The journey north took 3 weeks of hard travel through country that seemed determined to test their resolve. They crossed swollen rivers with Laurent's expert guidance, navigated narrow mountain passes still choked with late spring snow, and camped under skies so vast they made Cecilia feel both insignificant and impossibly free. Hazel rode in front of Sanish most days, her small hands gripping the saddle horn while he told her stories in Lakota, teaching her the language of her new family. They crossed into Canadian territory on a morning wrapped in fog, the border marked only by Laurent's quiet announcement that they had passed into a different world. "Here, the laws are different," he said in his French accented English. "Not perfect, but better. The Mounties do not hunt Indians like animals. You will find more peace here." Sanish felt tension he had carried for weeks finally begin to ease. They were beyond the reach of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, beyond the jurisdiction of those who would tear his family apart. For the first time since receiving that letter, he could breathe fully. Laurent led them to a settlement 3 days' ride from the border, a mixed community of Metis, Cree, and Siksika peoples living alongside a handful of white traders and trappers. The houses were rough but sturdy, built from logs and sod, with smoke rising from chimneys into the clear northern air. Children played in the muddy streets, their laughter carrying on the wind. It looked like hope. "Your sister lives on the far side of the settlement," Laurent told Sanish. "The house with the red door. I will leave you here." Sanish clasped the man's hand gratefully. "You have our thanks, Laurent. If you ever need anything, I know where to find you," Laurent said with a slight smile. Then turned his horse and disappeared back the way they had come. They rode slowly through the settlement, drawing curious but not hostile looks. A few people nodded in greeting. An old woman smiled at Hazel. The tension in Cecilia's shoulders began to ease. This place felt different from Fort Benton, from Helena, from anywhere they had been. It felt like somewhere they might belong. The house with the red door sat at the edge of the settlement, larger than most, with a vegetable garden already showing green shoots and a sturdy corral holding several horses. Sanish dismounted and stood for a moment, staring at that red door, his heart pounding. 8 years since he had seen Winona. 8 years of silence broken only by that single message. Cecilia came to stand beside him, Hazel in her arms. "She's your sister," she said softly. "She will be happy to see you," before Sanish could knock. The door swung open and a woman stood there. Round with late pregnancy, her long black hair braided down her back. Her face older but unmistakably his sister's. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. Then Winona's eyes filled with tears and she launched herself at him, arms wrapping around his neck. "Brother," she sobbed in Lakota. "My brother. I thought I would never see you again." Sanish held her tightly, his own eyes burning. "I am here," he said, also in Lakota. "I am here, sister." A man appeared in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered with the mixed features of Siksika and Scottish heritage. 3 children peeked out from behind him, eyes wide with curiosity. "Winona?" the man said, concern in his voice. She pulled back, wiping her eyes, and switched to English. "Duncan, this is my brother Sanish. The one I told you about." She turned back to Sanish. "This is my husband, Duncan MacLeod, and our children, Margaret, James, and Thomas." Duncan stepped forward and offered his hand, his grip firm and welcoming. "Any family of Winona's is family to us. You are welcome here." Winona's eyes finally landed on Cecilia and Hazel, and her expression shifted to delighted surprise. "And who is this?" she asked. "This is my wife, Cecilia," Sanish said, his voice filled with pride. "And our daughter, Hazel." Winona's face lit up with joy. "Wife? Daughter? Oh, brother, come inside." Come inside and tell me everything. They spent that first evening around Winona's table, eating venison stew and fresh bread, while Sanish told the story of how he had found Cecilia and Hazel, how they had survived the winter together, how they had fallen in love and married despite everything arrayed against them. Winona listened with shining eyes, occasionally reaching across the table to squeeze Cecilia's hand. "You remind me of myself," she told Cecilia. "When I chose Duncan, my family was furious. They said I was betraying my people, that I should marry the man my grandmother chose. But I knew what my heart wanted, and I had the courage to reach for it. Just like you, it has not been easy," Cecilia admitted. "We left everything behind to come here, but you did not leave each other," Winona said. "That is what matters. Everything else can be rebuilt." Duncan leaned back in his chair, studying Sanish thoughtfully. "I have land adjoining ours," he said. "Good land with timber for building and a stream for water. It sits empty because I cannot work both properties. If you want it, it is yours. We can help you build a cabin before winter." Sanish stared at him, overwhelmed by the offer. "I have little money to pay you." "I am not asking for payment," Duncan said. "I am offering family help to family. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "Winona has talked about you for 8 years. If I want peace in my house, I need to keep you close." Laughter rippled around the table, and Cecilia felt something release in her chest that had been clenched tight since Fort Benton. They had found it, the place they had been searching for without knowing it existed. Not just land or shelter, but community. Belonging. That night, they slept in Winona's home, Hazel curled between them on a pallet of blankets near the fire. In the darkness, Cecilia whispered, "Is this real? Can we truly stay here and be safe?" "Yes," Sanish said with more certainty than he had felt about anything in months. "This is real. This is home." The next morning, Duncan took them to see the land. It was everything he had promised. A gentle clearing beside a clear stream with forest thick with game on 3 sides, and open meadow on the 4th. Cecilia walked the perimeter slowly, imagining where the cabin would stand, where the garden would grow, where Hazel could play safely. "It is perfect," she said, turning to Sanish with tears in her eyes. "It is more than I ever dreamed." He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Then we build our dream here," he said. The construction began a week later. Duncan brought men from the settlement, a mixture of Metis and Sixica, and they worked together with an efficiency born of experience. Sanish worked alongside them, his body remembering the rhythms of communal labor from his youth. Cecilia and Winona prepared meals for the workers, becoming fast friends as they cooked and talked and watched their children play together. "Hazel is a sweet child," Winona observed one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough. "She has taken to this new life remarkably well. She is resilient," Cecilia said. "She has had to be. But I think she finally feels secure, like she can be a child again instead of constantly afraid." Winona glanced at her. "And what about you? Do you feel secure?" Cecilia considered the question carefully. "I feel happier than I have ever been," she said slowly. "But there is still fear buried deep. Fear that someone will come and take this away, that we will wake up and find it was all temporary. That fear never fully leaves," Winona said gently. "I still have it sometimes, even after 8 years. But it gets smaller as the days of peace outnumber the days of struggle. You learn to trust that what you have built is real." By midsummer, the cabin stood complete, smaller than Sanesh's Montana home but sturdy and well-made. With a stone hearth Duncan had helped build and real glass in the windows, a luxury Cecilia had not expected. They moved in on a warm July evening, carrying their few possessions across the threshold of their own home. That night, with Hazel asleep in the loft they had built for her and moonlight streaming through the windows, Sanish and Cecilia lay together in their own bed for the first time. They made love slowly, reverently, not just joining their bodies but consecrating this space. This life they had fought so hard to claim afterward. Cecilia lay with her head on Sanish's chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady. "I never knew I could be this happy," she whispered. "After Thomas died, after we lost everything, I thought my life was over. That I would just exist, surviving day to day until Hazel was grown. But you gave me more than survival. You gave me joy. You gave me the same," Sanish said, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I thought I was meant to be alone. That wanting family, wanting love, was a weakness I had to bury. But you showed me it was strength. The greatest strength." She lifted her head to look at him, and in the moonlight, his face was beautiful, open and unguarded in a way it never was in daylight. "I love you," she said. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I you," he replied, pulling her up to kiss her deeply. "My wife, my heart." The seasons turned and their life took root. Sanish hunted and trapped while Cecilia tended an expanding garden that fed both their family and Winona's. Hazel thrived, growing tall and strong, learning to speak Lakota as fluently as English, spending her days racing through the forest with Winona's children or helping with chores. She called Sanish Papa without hesitation now, and the sound of it never failed to make him smile. In the autumn, Cecilia discovered she was pregnant. She told Sanish while they were bringing in the last of the harvest, his arms full of squash and her hands dusty with earth. He dropped everything he was holding and swept her up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "A child," he said, his voice thick with wonder. "Our child. Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy?" he repeated, setting her down gently and cupping her face in his hands. "Cecilia, I am beyond happy. I am blessed." "We are blessed." Winona was delighted by the news, immediately taking over the care of Cecilia with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had borne 3 children and knew every danger. She brought herbs for morning sickness, made special teas for strength, and told Cecilia every story she knew about childbirth. Both frightening and reassuring. "You will do well," she assured her sister-in-law. "You are strong, and Sanish will not leave your side. He will worry himself sick, but he will be there." She was right. As Cecilia's belly swelled through the winter, Sanish became almost comically protective, refusing to let her lift anything heavy, insisting she rest at the slightest sign of fatigue. Lying awake at night with his hand on her stomach, feeling their child move beneath his palm. "You are being ridiculous," Cecilia told him fondly one evening when he insisted on carrying her from the table to the bed, a distance of perhaps 10 feet. "I am being careful," he corrected, setting her down gently. "You carry the most precious thing in the world. I will not risk you or the baby." She pulled him down beside her and kissed him. "We are lucky to have you," she said. The baby came in early spring, during a warm rain that drummed on the cabin roof like a blessing. Winona attended the birth, her hands steady and sure, while Sanish paced outside with Duncan and Hazel wearing a path in the mud. When the baby's first cry split the air, Sanish burst through the door. "Propriety forgotten. A son," Winona announced, handing him the tiny, squalling bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. "You have a son, brother." Sanish took his child with trembling hands and stared down at the small red face, the tiny fists waving in outrage at being born. Something in his chest cracked open, flooding him with love so intense it was almost painful. "My son," he whispered. Cecilia, exhausted but radiant, held out her arms and he carefully placed the baby in them. She looked down at their child, then up at Sanish, tears streaming down her face. "What should we name him?" she asked. Sanish thought of his own father, killed before he could teach his son everything he needed to know. He thought of the long journey that had led him to this moment, to this family, to this overwhelming joy. "Chayton," he said. "It means falcon. May he grow strong and free." "Chayton Red Fox," Cecilia said, testing the name. It is perfect. Hazel crept close, her eyes huge as she looked at her new brother. He is so small, she breathed. Can I hold him? Cecilia and Sanish exchanged glances, then carefully transferred the baby to Hazel's lap, supporting her arms. The girl stared down at Chayton with such fierce love and protectiveness that Cecilia's heart squeezed. I will take care of him, Hazel promised solemnly. I will be the best big sister. I know you will, Sanish said, resting his hand on her head. As spring deepened into summer, their life settled into new rhythms around the baby. Cecilia nursed Chayton while Hazel brought her wildflowers and told elaborate stories. Sanish carved a cradle from cedar, decorating it with symbols of protection and strength. At night, the four of them would sit together, a complete family, and Sanish would sing Lakota lullabies he remembered from his own childhood. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, they sat outside the cabin watching Hazel teach Chayton to grab a dandelion fluff. Though at 3 months old, he could barely focus his eyes. Cecilia leaned against Sanish's shoulder, feeling complete contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. Do you ever think about that day on the cliff? She asked quietly. When the wagon was falling? Every day, Sanish admitted. I think about what would have happened if I had been somewhere else, if I had not heard you scream. I think about all the ways I could have lost you before I ever found you. But you did hear, Cecilia said. You did find us. And you chose to help, even though you owed us nothing. I owed you everything, Sanish said. I just did not know it yet. You brought life back to my world. You gave me a reason to be more than just a man surviving in the wilderness. You gave me family, purpose, joy. Hazel looked up from her play. Are you talking about the day Papa saved us? She asked. Yes, sweetheart, Cecilia said. I remember it, Hazel said thoughtfully. I remember being very scared. But then Papa caught me, and I knew we would be all right. I knew he was strong enough to save us. Sanish pulled the girl onto his lap, Chayton gurgling happily in her arms. You were very brave that day, he told her. And you have been brave every day since. Because I learned it from you and Mama, Hazel said simply. Later, after the children were asleep, Sanish and Cecilia stood together on their porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The settlement was quiet, except for the occasional dog bark or child's laugh. Smoke rose from chimneys, and lights glowed warm in windows. It was peaceful, ordinary, beautiful. I want to tell you something, Cecilia said, turning to face him. Something I have never said properly. What is it? Sanish asked, drawing her close. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing us that night, for opening your door, for choosing to help instead of turn away. Thank you for giving Hazel a father, for giving me a husband, for giving us both a home. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Sanish cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away the tears that spilled down her cheeks. You do not need to thank me, he said. Saving you saved me too. We saved each other. She kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it, all the love and gratitude and hope for their future. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Tell me a story, Cecilia said, snuggling against his chest. What kind of story? Our story, she said. The one we will tell our grandchildren someday. Sanish smiled and began to speak, his deep voice carrying into the night. Once, there was a man who lived alone in the mountains. He thought he needed nothing but the forest and sky. Then one stormy evening, he heard a woman calling for help. Her wagon was falling off a cliff, and she begged him to save her daughter. He did not hesitate. He ran forward and pulled them both to safety, and in that moment, everything changed. Cecilia closed her eyes, listening to him weave their history into legend, making it larger and more meaningful, shaping it into something that could be passed down through generations. And she knew that this was what mattered, not the hardship they had endured or the prejudice they had faced, but the fact that they had found each other and chosen to build something beautiful together in the cabin behind them. Their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. Around them, the forest whispered secrets to the wind. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to one small family's triumph over circumstance, to love that refused to be diminished by the narrow minds of others, to hope that persisted even in the darkest moments. Sonish Red Fox and Cecilia Shaw Red Fox stood together on their porch, and they were home.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.